Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. It's a pleasure to be back on this beautiful morning, the 27th, Tuesday, January 2026, 32 minutes past the hour of 9 a.m. We are about just over 30 minutes late because I was going over some things and trying to digest it all. But yeah, always a pleasure to be back, to see you guys. Sorry. And for those of you, the few of you that made it to the conversation last night, thank you so much for having been part of that. We had a fruitful debate or discussion about Arsenal's attack, which I figured, or I think has sort of had gone under the radar in a way. But for those of you that have recently joined the community in the form of new subscribers, thank you so much for joining the party. Continue to like what we do, continue to be part of the discussion. Go over to the short section, watch our content, go over to the video section, watch that, leave a comment down, and let's continue to expound on the discussion. Let's continue to share. But also on that, or on a similar note, you can come up with things that you think perhaps we need to pay more attention to or more detail to, and we will give it a go, for the purposes of esteemed followers on the channel, really. So yeah, that will be the case in that regard. So this morning we'll be taking a more magnified lens into what we expect to come through the transfers. A lot of transfer news, making the rounds, reports, gossip, and some serious news. Teams are trying to make moves at the tail end of the month, and knowing what will be at stake is that UEFA Champions League places, Europa League, UEFA Conference League, and of course league positions. Then you have relegation battles to fight and things like that. So teams are trying to ready themselves for the final phase of the season. It's more like the mid-final phase of the season, because we've just transitioned from the halfway point, and particularly in the Premier League, we have about 15 games still left to play. There's still plenty to play for the respective teams, whether those at whether it's those at the top end of the table, those in the mid-table, and those at the bottom end of the table, because mathematically, Wolverhampton Wanderers, if they can avoid defeat in the next 15 games, all they need is win about 10 of their last 15 games, possibly draw about 3. Is it? No, maybe more than that. Maybe a couple of draws in there, and they could perhaps stand a chance to survive relegation. It's a possibility mathematically, just the same way it is a possibility mathematically that Liverpool are still in the title race, that Man United are in the title race, that it's not all done and dusted for all those mid-table teams. Hell, in any case, one would argue Newcastle are still in the title race. Really, they're 22 points behind the table leaders in Arsenal. Why? Because mathematically they are. But is that the reality? It doesn't. It seems a little bit far from it, So there's all that to ponder about. Yesterday, like I said, yesterday night, we're taking a magnifying glass into the appalling attack line of that Arsenal team, who we sort of had gone under the radar. Something that if somebody just told it to you, you'd equally be surprised that that is the case in the first place. Why? Because you have an attack that is struggling to score goals. You have an attack that and this goes from the strikers to the wingers. Hell, I could add the attacking midfielders. Their goal reservoirs just seem to have dried up. Whether it's Bukayo Saka, Victor Gyökeres, Gabriel Martinelli, Noni Madueke, Leandro Trossard. We're talking about players that have gone 11, 13 games without a goal in open play. For Victor Gyökeres, his last goal in the Premier League was a penalty against Everton. Take that away, and it's 11 Premier League appearances without a goal. When you look at Bukayo Saka across all competitions, arguably the most consistent Arsenal player over the last 5 years, he's just come up dry. He's just emptied, and this dates to as far back as last season. Of course, last season, the justification was that hamstring injury that had kept him out of action for about 3 months and things like that. But he's since long recovered from that. And yet, are we still talking about Arsenal? Not the topic. This is just the preamble. So, and this UEFA Champions League to come, but this is just a preamble. So, when you look at the likes of Trossard, Noni Madueke, and things like that, so when you magnify things at clubs, you find that there are even bigger problems. Now, when you cross over to Man United, you find that perhaps in a day or two, Michael Carrick has changed the face of the team with those 2 big wins against Manchester City in the Manchester Derby, against Arsenal, and everybody seems to hold him in a different regard now, and to look at Manchester United in a different shape. Like I said, as an expectation from the Man United fans in the aftermath of that victory against Man United is that they're going to be calling for the Premier League title just beyond the top 4 finish. They're going to be calling for Michael Carrick possibly to be given the full-time role, depending on how he performs until the end of the season. He's done tremendously well against the big opponents. So the question is, can he continue with that sort of run of good form, even with the mid-table teams and the smaller teams, if you want to comprehend it that way? So there's a lot of things. Liam Rafinha over there at Chelsea, I think he's had 3 consecutive victories now, and he sort of has his machine going. So there's that. So as we take into this second middle end of the season, clubs are trying to organize themselves to prepare themselves for what their ambitions are. Of course, you do not expect a lot of transfer activity at the top end for most clubs because majority may think, well, we have our bases covered, or we have enough within our squads to see us through the season. So you have that, and that's why when you look at a majority of the transfer reports and news, you'll find that the mid-table teams and the smaller teams are formulating majority of that news. They are formulating majority of that news. Yesterday, we spoke about this, that according to The Athletic, Nottingham Forest had made a £35 million bid for Crystal Palace striker Jean-Philippe Mateta, but the Eagles want at least £40 million and will only let the 28-year-old Frenchman leave if the price is made by and they are able to bring in a replacement. Now, I don't know. This doesn't sound right for me in the sense that if I'm Jean-Philippe Mateta, dropping Crystal Palace for Nottingham Forest doesn't seem much of a difference. Forget where both teams finished on the Premier League log last season, with Nottingham Forest finishing 7th and Crystal Palace, possibly 11th or 9th, thereabout, or even 12th, I think. So there's not a huge disparity between the two sides because the season prior to the last, Nottingham Forest were fighting for their lives in the relegation cohort. Crystal Palace themselves, for the first half of the season, last campaign, they were in the same bracket, So it wouldn't make much sense for a 28-year-old who thinks you're done with Crystal Palace and looking to perhaps make an upgrade, unless Nottingham Forest are offering crazy money, that you'd make that switch. Anyways, it's the player's decision to make. Then Everton and Guinea-Bissau forward Beto, 27, is one of the options Juventus are considering as they look to bring in a striker during the winter window. Pedri says goodbye. Good morning, Pedri. I hope you're okay. I don't know where you're rushing to, but it's all good. Wish you the best of luck throughout your day. So when it comes to Juventus, I mean, you have Jonathan David and Dusan Vlahovic, who, by the way, I hold in high regards. I do not know what's happened with him. And there seems to be this whole intensified demand for a striker when it comes to um, Juventus. And I'm thinking to myself, what's gone so bad for the 25-year-old that he can no longer cut it for Juventus? We're talking about a player that they spent good money on to bring him into the club from Fiorentina. What, about 3 years, just 3 years back? And yes, I understand that things can go, let's say, bad for a player, and that they do not hit the numbers that one would expect. For example, you go back to the 2023-2024 campaign, 33 appearances, 16 goals and 14 assists. That's a 20-goal involvement. The subsequent season, that dwindled down to 14-goal involvement with only 10 goals in 29 appearances. Of course, it wasn't good. This campaign, only 3 goals in 13 appearances. It's been poor. That's the honest bit. When you go over to the UEFA Champions League this season, he scored 3 goals and provided 1 assist in four games. That's not too bad. So I do not want to think that all of a sudden Dusan Vlahovic went from being a good player or a good striker to being a bad one. Something must have happened. Now, this goes back to the summer. There were all reports linking him with the potential move away, but it never happened. And because it never happened, he remains a Juventus player who they can look to deploy. But Juventus have been linked with Victor Osimhen, with Joshua Zirkzee, with now Beto, Yusuf El Nasiri, Jean-Philippe Mateta, and all sorts of names of strikers. The question is why? Randal Kolo Muani, they made inquiries to PSG about Randal Kolo Muani, who is on a season-long run to Tottenham Hotspur. SD Mo says, hello, how are you doing, my brother or sister? Good to have you on the broadcast. So, really, and then Juventus are also interested in Liverpool's, winger Federico Chiesa. Now, and the Dutch forward Joshua Zirkzee. Now, when it comes to the story of Federico Chiesa, it feels more like destined that sooner or later he will be returning to Italy. Of course, injuries have not done him a huge favor, nor has the lack of sufficient game time at Liverpool, really. And if Italy are to qualify to the finals of the World Cup, he's a player that they can use. Maybe not as the key player with whom their performances revolve around, but he still has good football in his legs. Only that injuries have done him dirty, So, anyways, Manchester United midfielder Bruno Fernandes is set to wait until the end of the season before deciding on his future, with the 31-year-old his current deal running until 2027 and having the option for a further year. That's according to the Mirror. Now, when it comes to the situation with Bruno Fernandes, it's one that we've discussed before, following the enormous interest from Al Hilal last summer in his services and their willingness to offer up to £100 million for his signature and to put him on a very juicy contract. Of course, it ended up not happening, perhaps because the player didn't seem convinced enough, but some senior figures at the club are reported to have been hoping or would have been okay if Bruno Fernandes left the club. We're talking about a player, I think, with 9 Premier League assists or 10 now, the player with most assists. So, I don't know. Unless Man United is objective in this particular case is to recoup some resources, that means with the year left to his contract, that's you can milk it for what it is or exercise that option to extend the contract for a further year, because let's be honest, 31 years of age is not old, is not that old, because just the other day I was making a case on why Manchester United, I feel or think, should have, retained Casemiro for an extra year, and age was not a factor. He only turns 34 in February, So when it comes to Bruno Fernandes, we know what his footballing qualities are. We know what he offers to that Manchester United team. We know how crucial he is to that team. So unless they're saying they want to recoup some of the money or even make a profit off of it for what they spent to get him out of Sporting Lisbon during that era of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, then perhaps the summer is the period to act. And I do not know whether the priorities of Al Hilal have changed, but Saudi Pro League clubs, there seems to be sort of a summer spending drum rolls are going their way, with attention being paid to Vinicius Junior at Real Madrid and Mohamed Salah at Liverpool. So we'll have to wait and see. Of course, they've sort of cut down on their spending, but I think in the short term, and perhaps the long term is yet to be proven, but they have built themselves quite the reputation and the image when it comes to their domestic football, because they've gone on and taken some of the best players, both old, mixed age in terms of middle age, and a bit and slightly younger, in the form of the Riyad Mahrez, Eduardo Mendy, Sadio Mane, Cristiano Ronaldo. Then you have the Joao Felix, who are in middle age. You remember when Ruben Neves left Wolverhampton Wanderers to join them, he was about 23 or 24 thereabout. So they built themselves that. The likes of Malcolm, we know Neymar had a stint there. Never mind that he never worked out really well. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang had a stint there. Alexander Lacazette is over there. So Karim Benzema, N'Golo Kante, Jordan Henderson had a stint there. They've taken managers like Simone Inzaghi, George Jesus. So really, they've sort of painted themselves, or they built themselves quite the image. And ahead of the World Cup 2030, ahead of the World Cup 2034, which they are expected to host or will be hosting, is that they'll continue to build on that image, and taking players like Mohamed Salah and Vinicius Junior will be a step in the right direction. Of course, they've been clamoring for players like Gabriel Martinelli from Arsenal, among other interests. I'm sure if Barcelona were willing to sell, they would have no hesitation in making a move for players like Rafinha, players like Lamine Yamal, Robert Lewandowski. Speaking of Robert Lewandowski, a couple of months back, it was being reported, I think out of Spain, or I don't remember, maybe English media, I don't remember the exact source, that Barcelona are considering signing Harry Kane as a replacement for Robert Lewandowski. Now, we all know we do not have question marks over the goal scoring prowesses of Harry Kane and whether he would bang in the goals at Barcelona, because he's sort of changed and adapted his style to be, while he remains an outright striker, he sort of digs in deep. At Bayern Munich, we've got to see that. Sometimes you get the feeling he's playing more like as a 10, But Bayern Munich, from what I do gather, is that they've initiated contract extension talks with Harry Kane until the summer of 2027, possibly 2028. That means sort of a 2-year contract extension. So possibility with an option to extend for further years. So while Barcelona may ponder losing Robert Lewandowski, they must also remember that it may not be that simple or that easy to find a replacement for a player that does deliver the kinds of goals that he is delivered in Barcelona colors. So you have all that to ponder about. Then Atletico de Madrid, Atletico de Madrid are set to hold talks with Atalanta about 26-year-old Brazilian midfielder Ederson for the Italian side. Now, again, I do not know why Ederson has been one of those most sought-after players without making an actual transfer. At one point was linked with a move to Liverpool, heavily linked with moves to Manchester United. So he's been there and about, or even recommended. A very good central midfielder, but he seems to be the kind of player that clubs have talked about but have not gone ahead to sign. Reminds me of the situation of Andrea Beto. Is it Beto? No. Andrea Beto, something, yes, from Torino, the Italian striker. It reminds me of the case of Jan Movila. It reminds me the case of Geoffrey Kandogobia, who is currently playing for Monaco, the likes of William Carvalho, all these kinds of players that every now and then you had in the midst of news in terms of being linked with perhaps a move to Premier League clubs, but it just never happened. It just never happened. So Jan Movila, currently 35 years of age, he's of course far from that. He's far from that. But that's just to give you an example of how a player can be in that sort of model. Another player that I would add to that list, look at Ademola Lookman. Ever since he left Fulham, went to Atlanta, he's been a quite successful star in Atlanta and Italian football. Inter Milan wanted to sign him last summer. They could not agree a deal with Atlanta. But how many times have we had his name in the press being linked with all sorts of moves to these big clubs, and yet it's not happened for him. So we keep waiting to see whether things will fall in place. So perhaps, so I do paint Anderson in that sort of role. For Atletico de Madrid, you're going to need a replacement for Koke. I mean, they brought Johnny Cardoso, but I don't know whether they don't trust him well enough, but he doesn't seem to start so many games. I think so like that. So we just have to wait and see. Then also, Everton have rejected an offer from Lazio for 22-year-old English midfielder Tim Iro Banham. The Newcastle English defender Jamal Lascelles, 32, has been told he can't leave the club if the right deal is found. And then Wolves did reject a 6.9 million bid from Roma for 23-year-old and Norway left back David Mola Wofe there, while former Southampton and Rangers manager Russell Martin is among the candidates to take over as Leicester City manager following the sacking of Mati Cifuentes. Now, anyways, that's a speculation as compiled by BBC Sport. When it comes to transfer gossip and speculation, really, we'll have to wait and see how things go. I know that Flamengo remain engaged in talks with West Ham United over the possible transfer of Lucas Paqueta. I think he really feels like he wants to return home to Brazil. I mean, East or West, home is the best. Practically understandable. Flamengo have the capability to pay him some good money. Do not be surprised over the summer when Gabriel Jesus returns to Pyramides, or if it goes to teams like Juventus, who for long have sought after him. We know the quality is there. He just doesn't score for you many goals, Gabriel Jesus. So you know what you get by signing him. Really. Anyways, away from that, the UEFA Champions League does return tomorrow for match day 8, which is the final game of the group stage of the league table phase, and then we'll go into the playoffs before getting to the round of 16, which is the beginning of the knockout stages. But first will be the playoffs for the teams that finish between 9th and 24th. So in those fixtures that will be coming your way tomorrow at 11 p.m., remember all games kick off at the same time. So if you're one of those that, just like me, want to watch as many games as possible, unfortunately, you'll be only able to keep your eyes on maybe 1, 2, 3 games, depending on your possibilities or capacity in terms of device. But yeah, Athletic Bilbao will be up against Sporting CP, Liverpool against Qarabag, Barcelona take on Copenhagen, Monaco have Juventus, Ajax take on Olympiacos, PSG take on Newcastle, Dortmund up against Inter Milan, Chelsea play away to Napoli, Eintracht Frankfurt at home against Tottenham, Atletico de Madrid play at home against Bordeaux Glimot, Leverkusen at home against Villarreal, while Kairat Almaty will be playing away to Arsenal, Pafos will entertain Slavia Praha, Man City will entertain Galatasaray, while Marseille will be away to Belgium against Club Brugge, Bayern Munich will play away to PSV in Netherlands. So those are the fixtures that you should expect should come your way in as far as the UEFA Champions League is concerned. Now, of course, there's a lot at stake, particularly for teams Real Madrid, for other than the top two. You who are the only teams currently guaranteed a top 8 finish. All the other teams will be fighting for that and more, depending on where you are. If you're Real Madrid, you'll be fighting to remain at least third, or even hope that Bayern Munich do lose away to PSV and then you climb to second, because it's not just about positions, it's also about the monetary value attached to where you finish and how many wins that you get, so far in this competition or at this stage of the competition. So really, there's that. So Liverpool, again, same story, because those two, Real Madrid and Liverpool, have 15 points. Tottenham, 14 points in 15th place. PSG, Newcastle, and Chelsea, who complete the top 8, have 13 points apiece. Now, of course, Barcelona, Sporting CP, Manchester City, Atletico de Madrid, Atlanta, that's between 9th place and 13th place. That means what? 5 teams, they all have 13 points as well. So there's going to be a lot to play for. One, if you're a big team, like your Man City, like your Chelsea, you want to avoid the playoff because it adds 2 extra games to your calendar. Now, whereas the 2 extra games could contribute to your revenue, the question is it worth it? Because that means a compilation or a congestion of fixtures that then you're destined for. And I say that because if you're Manchester City, you're still in the EFL Cup. You're playing in the semi-finals against Newcastle for the return leg. Then possibly a final in February, if you can go past Newcastle. So you adding 2 extra knockout games for the UEFA Champions League, not knowing who you're going to get, sort of puts you in that sort of bracket. And then you're still in the FA Cup, which we know returns in February. You have the Premier League to deal with. We know that you're in arm's distance away from Arsenal, who are at the summit of the Premier League table, only 4 points ahead of you. So really, you want that. If you're Barcelona, you equally want to avoid the playoff. I mean, by the stature of Barcelona's caliber, quality, and brand position in global football, we shouldn't be discussing them in the context of a playoff. The expectation is they should be advancing straight away. Because tell me why Tottenham are in the top 5 and Barcelona aren't. Of course, it's footballing merit, but I'm talking in terms of expectations. Why are Newcastle there and Barcelona aren't? So this is a team that has won the competition before. This is a team with pedigree. Of course, the last time of winning it being 2015, under Luis Enrique. Your Manchester City 2023 champion, Inter Milan losing finalists from last season, you're 14th. Man City are 11th. Now, Juventus have lost it for now what? 4 or 5 seasons almost. They haven't been that Juventus. And continuously they try to find hacks to get themselves back in. So there will be plenty to play for. And unfortunately for Inter Milan, their game is against Dortmund, away to the Signal Iduna Park. The one thing I love about the Signal Iduna Park is the atmosphere that they create or within that environment. So what are you talking about? I'm talking about the UEFA Champions League and why Barcelona, by my expectations, should be finishing directly in the top 8. And why should they be having to add 2 extra games to their name when you have teams like Newcastle, teams like Tottenham Hotspurs, who by far fall behind Barcelona's pedigree in the UEFA Champions League, later on those that are currently at the summit of this table, you know, so in other words, all these big teams who are still involved in domestic cup competitions, they are fighting for their domestic league title. The last thing you want is to pile fixtures, and those two extra fixtures, two may seem too small a number, but you do not know what it means in terms of the overload, the overall overload that then it puts on the squad. If you're Barcelona, you know that you've gone through a series of bad injuries to a couple of players here and there. Joan Garcia, Lamine Yamal struggling with that groin. The other day, Pedri, holding his hamstring. We know that at one point Lewandowski has been out through injury and things like that. So we know that Rafinha has suffered a similar fate during the course of this season. So, and all the other names that you can pull out on Barcelona's roster. So if you're Barcelona, one, to try and reduce on the load on those players, it gives you that competitive advantage, because then that means more rest. Because in the midst of congestion of fixtures, you'll find that teams that finish in the top 8 tend to have that bit of an advantage, because there will be a time when you'll be playing and they will be rested, waiting for you at the very stage where they want you. That's at the round of 16. Now, take that with the responsibilities that you may have domestically in the La Liga, in the Premier League, in the German Bundesliga, in the Italian Serie A, French Ligue 1, and that's where it becomes difficult, So all these big teams would want to avoid, finishing in the playoff places. They would rather finish within the top 8. But again, at the end of the day, only 8 teams can finish within those places. And while that still is the case, we also know that the top 2 spots are already taken for the top 8. It's a given that Bayern Munich, Arsenal will finish in the top 8. So that means you have 66 places left to play for the top 8. And the teams that want that position is right from 3rd place to as low as, let's see, realistically, as low as 13th place. I exclude Inter Milan because they have 12 points, and you need so many goals to be able to go past Real Madrid if they are to lose their final game, So, but in other words, all those teams, for example, if teams between 9th and 13th, that's Barcelona, Sporting CP, Man City, Atletico de Madrid, and Atlanta, win their final game, and the teams above them in Chelsea, Newcastle, PSG, Tottenham, Liverpool, and Real Madrid, then we could have a flip of the table, if those teams do not win their final game or do not get even a point out of that. So really, there's a lot to play for, when you go at the bottom end of the table, of course, Kairat Almaty, Villarreal, Slavia Praha, Eintracht Frankfurt, Ajax, up to Eintracht Frankfurt, that's the bottom 4. Those ones literally have nothing to play for other than money. Nothing. They cannot qualify for the playoff places. Now, depending on how results go elsewhere, Ajax, Union Saint-Gilloise, Pafos, Benfica, Bodo Glimt, Club Brugge, Copenhagen, and Napoli, who occupy 25th place up to the 32nd place, depending on how results go elsewhere, they could finish within those playoff places, because those at 6 points, if you win your final game, you go to 9 points. And remember, at least 3 teams in the top 24 have 8 points. So that means there's that advantage, provided things work your way, So really, it's going to be a lot for these teams to think through. There's everything to play for majority of these teams, And if you're within let's say 16th place, okay, 17th, teams with 10 points and onwards. Again, there's everything to play for to remain within at least the playoff. Let's not forget, last season is our eventual champion, PSG, had to go through a playoff. They had to play against Brest before meeting Liverpool at the round of 16. Aston Villa at the quarterfinals and Arsenal at the semi-finals. And then, of course, Inter Milan at the finals. So that's what they have to play for, So there are teams like Arsenal looking to set their own records, 8 wins in 8. There's that. The teams whose every win at the continental competition sort of increases their resolve on going on to win this title, So it's that a bit of things that you ought to think about. Of course, the top scorer is Kylian Mbappe with 11 goals. Then Harry Kane now moved second with 7 goals following that press against Union Saint-Gilloise. Anthony Gordon, Brad Erling Haaland, and Victor Osimhen all have 6 goals. So really interesting stuff there. Again, surprising, but the top team does not have a top scorer in the top 5 because I think Martinelli is the highest goal scorer for them with about 5 goals. Excuse me. Jesus Christ, why am I yawning this early morning? Anyways, so that's the mix of it. That's the mix of it for the UEFA Champions League. So all those games have something to play for. Benfica need to win against Real Madrid to have a chance of making the playoff places. Jose Mourinho against his former side. Alvaro Carreras going against his former side in Benfica. So there's that. Tottenham and Frankfurt, these two met last season in the UEFA Europa League. Tottenham won that game by 0-0, I think, away in Germany. Don't remember the reverse score when they met again at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Bayern Munich play away to PSV. PSV may sound easy, but it's not that easy a game. Barcelona against Copenhagen, we're talking about a Copenhagen side that forced Napoli into a 1-1 draw. Really, they were down to 10 men for a good chunk of that game. So, I don't know. Monaco will be seeking to bounce back from their humiliating defeat against Real Madrid. They lost 6-1 when they take on Juventus. PSG Newcastle, I don't know. It sounds like a big game, but is it actually a big game? I think both teams will give a go at it. PSG have somewhat not been very convincing this season, but yeah, they will find a way. They have to find a way to win, just as much as they found a way to sort of reclaim that top spot at the summit of the French Ligue 1 standing. So, of course, they've had their injury struggles to some of their key players here and there. And that perhaps sort of justifies their fate this season in a way, or their underperformances. But Luis Enrique is still a very, very trusted manager. Inter Milan, Borussia Dortmund, big fixture. I remember Dortmund being knocked out by Barcelona, I think at the quarterfinals last campaign. Barcelona won the first leg. I think, was it by 4-0? And then they went away to the Signal Iduna Park and lost by 3-1. Sahur Girassi scoring, I think, a brace in that one. Was the other an own goal? No, it's the goal that Dortmund conceded that was the own goal. So yeah, teams have everything to play for once they meet in this competition. Just let me know what your thoughts are on the UEFA Champions League I will continue perhaps to talk about it a little more in tonight's broadcast, depending on how things go. That's at 11 p.m. East African time, and then, of course, tomorrow morning on the actual day of these games to be played. Otherwise, it's always a pleasure to have you around. Thank you so much, Pedri. Thank you so much, SDMO, for having been part of this podcast, and every single one of you that never submitted a comment, never liked, but were part of this podcast for however much time you could afford to be with us. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.